Francis Ford Coppola spent 40 years dreaming about one film. In 2022, at 83 years old, he finally made it. He sold parts of his wine empire and put $120 million of his own money on the line. When it premiered at Cannes in May 2024, the audience booed for nearly 10 minutes. The film made only $14.3 million worldwide. Then came the lawsuit. An extra claimed something happened on set that nobody was supposed to see. At 86, Coppola is back in the spotlight, but not in the way anyone expected. The real story goes deeper than the headlines. Francis Ford Coppola came into the world on April 7, 1939, in Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, and from the very beginning, his life carried the weight of history and hardship. His father, Carmine, was making only $50 a week with the NBC Symphony, and his mother, Italia, had put her acting dreams aside to build a life they hoped would be steady. Both came from families that had escaped poverty in southern Italy, and even though Detroit was booming with industry, the Coppolas were living right on the edge. His middle name was Ford because Carmine admired the man who gave him work, and in a way, it tied their family to the city that shaped their earliest struggles. Those first years settled into his bones while the world was on the edge of war, and his parents kept trying to hold everything together as America changed around them. When he was 9, everything shifted again. In 1948, in Queens, he was suddenly struck with polio. One fever, one night, and the next morning, he could not move the way he used to. Doctors placed him in quarantine for 9 long months, and that small room became his entire world. The polio ward was overflowing, with gurneys stacked 3 or 4 high, and everywhere he looked he saw children trapped inside iron lungs, their faces reflected in mirrors while they cried for their parents. He wasn't hit as hard as some, but he couldn't leave his bed for almost a year. To escape, he created a tiny puppet theater with an 8mm camera, and filmed neighborhood kids pretending to be gladiators. He even used his mother's lipstick as fake blood. Those early scenes became the seeds of a lifelong love for film, and the quiet hours of sickness shaped the empathy he carried with him forever. Life at home wasn't gentle either. Carmine was brilliant but strict, and when Francis brought home a bad grade, his father broke his first 8mm camera in a burst of rage. That moment stayed with him for years. Even so, Francis kept chasing the thing that made him feel alive. He sneaked into theater classes at Lafayette High School, forging notes and hoping Carmine wouldn't find out. Carmine forced him to take flute lessons in the hope his son would follow in his musical path, but Francis knew his heart belonged to stories and images. That tension between father and son shaped his hunger to prove himself, and it became a quiet thread running through many of his future characters. Then came 1955, when the family moved to Great Neck on Long Island. The place was far more affluent than anything Francis had known, and it exposed him to the McCarthy hearings on television. Watching fear and power collide on screen pushed him toward an instinctive distrust of authority. Slowly, he began to build a tiny film lab in his backyard. He processed neighbors' home movies for $2 a reel and saved every cent. It was a small operation, but it taught him the thrill of creating something with his own hands, and it became the first steady step toward the director he hoped to become. His polio left a limp that stayed with him for life. It was small but constant, and he carried a sense of inferiority with it. Later, while working on The Godfather, he even shared his childhood stories with Marlon Brando to soften him during tense moments on set, hoping their shared vulnerability would bring cooperation. The limp became a reminder of everything he had survived, and at the same time, a source of strength that helped him lead with empathy. In 1956, at Hofstra University, Francis finally felt the freedom to push boundaries. He directed a shocking version of Macbeth using real pig blood. Some people in the audience actually threw up, and the campus buzzed with rumor. But he wasn't finished. He wrote a play that won a $500 prize, then staged Electra with a nude scene that got him expelled. Even though it cost him, the experience showed how willing he was to challenge rules if it meant telling a story with force. It became a pattern that followed him for decades. By 1960, he found himself at UCLA's MFA cinema program. There he wrote and directed a strange short film called Tonight for Sure in 1961, shot on an abandoned nudist colony with topless extras. It won him the Samuel Goldwyn Award and $5,000, a sum that changed everything because it opened doors to the industry. He showed an early mix of bold choices and business sense, and people began to notice him. His first real job came in 1962 with Roger Corman on Tower of London. He was hired as a dialogue director and rewrote an entire script overnight for $175 a week. Corman was impressed and moved him to editing The Premature Burial, where Francis cut up to 300 feet of film a day. It was exhausting, but it became the perfect training ground, teaching him speed, discipline, and how to make a film work from the inside. Then 1963 arrived with another leap. He directed his first feature, Dementia 13, a $20,000 horror film shot in Ireland in only 9 days. During the shoot, he met Eleanor Neal, an art assistant. 3 days later, she was pregnant, and on February 2, 1963, they married in a Vegas chapel. It was a chaotic beginning, but also the start of a lifelong partnership that steadied him through many storms. By 1966, he completed his UCLA thesis film, You're a Big Boy Now. Nicholas Roeg mentored the project, giving Francis rare guidance. During filming, he slipped something into actor Arthur Hill's drink, and Hill ended up punching a medic in frustration. Chaos filled the set, but the film earned critical praise and helped Coppola receive his MFA. That mix of creativity and unpredictability became part of his reputation. In late 1967, Warner Brothers offered him a 6-film contract worth $600,000. It was a massive leap for a young director. His first assignment was writing and directing This Property is Condemned with Natalie Wood. Their working relationship collapsed when she refused to film nude scenes he believed the story needed. The studio took her side and fired him from directing, though they kept his writing credit. The experience burned him deeply and pushed him toward a longing for creative freedom away from studio control. Then came The Rain People in 1969. It was meant to be a personal film far from Hollywood's grip, but the budget soared to $5 million. Studio executives forced him to remove a controversial abortion subplot. He refused to let it go and secretly took a full print to the Venice Film Festival, where it won the Golden Shell. That act turned into a symbol of his devotion to artistic honesty. In that same period, he founded American Zoetrope in San Francisco. He borrowed $300,000 from George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and set up the studio in a converted warehouse. He wanted a space free from Hollywood's factory mindset, a home for filmmakers who valued creativity over rules. Zoetrope became a center for experimentation and helped launch a movement away from traditional studio control. But risks carry weight. In 1971, he produced George Lucas's THX 1138. The film lost $2 million and frightened the studio. Coppola had even placed his own house as collateral to secure the financing. The loss pushed Warner Bros. To cancel the rest of his contract and collapse Zoetrope financially. He found himself facing debt, distrust, and frustration. Yet even at that low point, the gamble proved his readiness to risk everything for vision. By 1970, the IRS stepped in and audited Zoetrope, seizing assets over $47,000 in unpaid taxes. The pressure was crushing. Coppola had to pawn Eleanor's jewelry to cover the debt. It was a frightening period that pushed him to the edge, and makeshift solutions became the norm. Still, he never gave in. He kept the studio alive with sheer will, and the scars from that time shaped how he approached business for the rest of his life. The horsehead scene in The Godfather was never meant to feel safe. Coppola wanted the moment to hit like a punch, so when fake heads kept looking too clean, he turned to something far more real. A horse in New Jersey was already scheduled for slaughter at a dog food plant, and the art director picked one that matched what the film needed. When the head arrived in a crate at 2 in the morning, packed in dry ice, the whole room froze. John Marley had been rehearsing with a fake one, so when he pulled back the sheets and saw the real thing, his reaction came from a place that could not be fake. Coppola knew people would complain, and they did, but he kept saying the horse was already dead and headed to dog food. He believed the moment needed this weight, and that belief shaped one of the most shocking shots in movie history. While all of this was happening, Coppola himself was fighting his own battles behind the camera. The first 22 days of filming were like a storm. Paramount fired him twice because they hated almost every choice he made. They didn't like the dark lighting. They didn't like Al Pacino as Michael. They even brought in Scorsese as a backup in case they needed to replace Coppola completely. Coppola kept pushing, insisting that Pacino was the soul of the story, and that Brando had to play Vito no matter what the studio said. On Oscar night, when Coppola won for Patton, he sat in New York wondering if he still had a job. His win changed everything. Soon after, leaked footage of Brando's screen test caused a frenzy, and Paramount realized Coppola might actually know exactly what he was doing. The tension didn't end there, because the real mob was watching too. The Lucchese family sent warnings. The Italian-American Civil Rights League, led by Joe Colombo, wanted control over how Italian Americans were shown. They organized protests and threatened the production. Crew members got death threats, and locations were vandalized. Coppola felt the pressure every day as the line between the real underworld and his fictional one got thinner. Eventually, the producers made a deal. They donated $25,000 to Colombo's league, and the threats finally eased. The atmosphere stayed tense, though. Colombo was later shot at a rally only blocks from a filming location, a reminder that this movie lived close to real danger. Even smaller roles were shaped by chaos. When the actor playing Clemenza demanded $10,000 more and walked off, Coppola had to find someone fast. He cast Richard Sotui, a street extra with no experience. They told him his lines just before filming. He had no rehearsal. And when he said the line, "Leave the gun, take the cannoli," it wasn't in the script at all. It was something he came up with in the moment. That raw, unplanned energy is what gave the scene its charm, turning a crisis into a piece of movie history. But the mob didn't stop causing trouble. Their outrage forced Paramount into deals that made executives furious. After the studio donated the $25,000 to Colombo's group, their stock even dipped. Producer Al Ruddy was fired for making the agreement, then rehired because Coppola refused to continue without him. Everyone felt caught between two worlds. One was Hollywood with its contracts and budgets. The other was something darker, louder, and less predictable. The film lived inside that tension, and it soaked into every frame. When The Godfather Part II swept the Oscars in December 1974, Coppola should have been celebrating, but he was drowning in debt. The movie cost $13 million, more than twice what the studio expected. They tried to buy him out for $1.5 million, thinking the film would flop. He refused and kept pushing. The movie later earned $48 million in the United States and $93 million worldwide. But Zoetrope, Coppola's company, still owed $5 million. He began transferring assets to his wife Eleanor to protect them. The awards didn't heal the financial wounds. They only highlighted how unstable everything underneath really was. By 1990, Zoetrope owed more than $28 million and filed for bankruptcy. His greatest artistic triumph had arrived hand in hand with disaster. Even small details caused trouble. Pacino grew attached to Michael Corleone's mustache in Part 2, and when the studio told him to shave it, he refused. For 3 weeks, everything stopped. Coppola backed him and halted production until the studio agreed to spend $20,000 on a makeup fix to keep continuity clean. The mustache stayed, and the fight became one more example of how much everyone was willing to sacrifice for the tiniest pieces of character. Robert De Niro took preparation to another level when he became young Vito. He spent 4 months learning the Sicilian dialect, then lived in Sicily for 69 days, studying how people moved, talked, and carried themselves. He gained weight and wore a smaller version of Brando's dental piece to match the look. In the final film, he spoke almost entirely in Sicilian, with only 8 words of English. His commitment turned Vito's early years into some of the most powerful scenes in the trilogy. Money problems never let Coppola breathe. Even after the 6 Oscar wins, debts kept growing. That is why he kept transferring key assets to Eleanor, trying to shield their family from creditors. The awards brought him respect, but not relief. Eventually, the financial collapse became a legend of its own, a warning to anyone who believed artistic success meant financial safety. The Havana scenes in Part 2 brought their own struggles. Coppola wanted to shoot in Cuba to capture the fall of Batista, but Castro's government refused. They blocked exterior shoots because they feared how the film might portray Cuba. Coppola countered by recreating Havana in the Dominican Republic and smuggling in cars from Castro's own garage to make it look authentic. He had to rebuild an entire world from scratch, and somehow those scenes became some of the most striking in the film. Then came Apocalypse Now, a project that spiraled into something nobody could control. In July 1976, Typhoon Olga ripped through the Philippines and destroyed almost everything. Up to 80% of the sets were gone, including the Kurtz compound, which had to be rebuilt 3 times. The budget exploded from $31.5 million to more than $106 million. The typhoon displaced more than 1.3 million people and crushed the local economy. Coppola kept filming by taking out loans and risking everything he owned. Nature, theft, and endless delays forced him to reshape his vision again and again. The cast faced danger too. Martin Sheen, who replaced Harvey Keitel early on, suffered a near-fatal heart attack on day 42. He was only 36. Production stopped for 8 weeks. Coppola wired $100,000 to cover his hospital bills. Sheen admitted later that the stress broke him. His hair and beard turned gray overnight. He drank heavily, sometimes 40 beers in a single night, and even smashed a hotel mirror before collapsing. The crew kept the truth secret because investors might have abandoned the project if they knew. Brando added a different kind of chaos when he arrived 80 pounds overweight, unprepared, and unwilling to learn his lines. He was paid $3 million for 2 weeks of work. Coppola had to hide his size in shadows and rewrite almost everything. Brando improvised 100 hours of material, which had to be trimmed just to make the film watchable. It started with a dream that looked bright from far away. Francis Ford Coppola believed One from the Heart would be his next great leap, something bold and glowing, something only he could pull off. He filmed it in Las Vegas, but not the real one. He rebuilt the whole city on sound stages and let the budget rise until it hit $26 million, which would be more than $80 million today. When it opened on February 11, 1982, the theater lights came up and the numbers were painful. It made only $389,249 in its first weekend across 41 theaters, and by the time it finished its run, it had reached only $636,796 in the entire country. Critics felt the film had no warmth. Audiences stayed away. Coppola had put his whole heart and fortune into it, using new video systems and editing tricks that no one else had tried. But the losses were so heavy that he had to sell his 23-acre American Zoetrope studio lot in 1983. It closed the door on his time as a fully independent filmmaker, and for years he took on commercial work just to stay above water. The failure turned into a warning Hollywood repeated for decades whenever ambition ran loose. Not long after, Coppola stepped into something different with The Outsiders. The year was 1983, the budget was $8 million, and the cast was a group of young actors who didn't yet know how famous they would become. Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, Matt Dillon, Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez, and others walked onto the set with hope. Then they discovered Coppola rewrote scenes every night. He would hand them new pages in the morning, sometimes just hours before shooting. They rehearsed for weeks, living with the story until the emotions felt real. Tension appeared, arguments happened, but the performances grew raw and strong. Coppola wanted the fire of teenage rebellion, and the waiting paid off. The film became a cult classic, something young viewers held close because it felt honest at a time when most teen films didn't. Behind the scenes, the chaos grew into legend. While the glow of The Outsiders lasted, Coppola made Rumble Fish that same year. It cost $10 million, but when the lights dimmed in theaters, audiences didn't welcome it. The film earned only about half its budget and lost close to $7.5 million. Coppola had turned it into an experiment in black and white, using jazz sounds and old silent film moods. One of the wildest moments came when Matt Dillon rode a motorcycle straight into a river during a chase. It wasn't planned. It nearly drowned him, but the cameras caught something unforgettable. Even so, the film failed, and that failure pushed Coppola to step back from his experimental streak for a while. Then came The Cotton Club in 1984, and with it, a storm that never seemed to end. What began as a $25 million project grew into a $58 million monster. There were mob ties, threats, fights, and lawsuits that stretched into the future. Producer Robert Evans faced intimidation from organized crime. Investors like Adnan Khashoggi and Roy Radin got pulled into a web of accusations, and Radin was murdered in 1983, setting off the Cotton Club trial. Coppola was dragged in as well, sitting in a courtroom for 7 hours to testify. Evans took the fifth and refused to answer. An $11 million insurance fraud case hung over everything. The entire production became one of Hollywood's most scandalous sagas, one talked about for years with a kind of disbelief. All of this fed into Coppola's growing debt. By the mid-1980s, he owed more than $30 million. To keep himself going, he pawned his Oscars and put up properties as collateral, including his real estate in San Francisco, where interest rates reached as high as 21%. Bankers appeared often at his door. Attorneys lined up. Coppola took commercial jobs, any work that kept the lights on. Finally, in 1985, the residuals from The Godfather arrived and brought over $40 million. It saved him from collapse and closed one of the darkest chapters in his life. The darkness returned in another way on May 26, 1986. Coppola's 22-year-old son, Giancarlo, was on a speedboat in Annapolis, Maryland, with Griffin O'Neill when the boat struck a tow line stretched between two other boats. The tow line struck Giancarlo and killed him instantly. He was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m., at Anne Arundel County General Hospital. Reports showed alcohol in his system, but said it didn't contribute to the crash. Griffin O'Neill was arrested for reckless operation, but avoided a manslaughter conviction. Eleanor Coppola, who witnessed the tragedy, carried the memory through every part of her life. The family later sued Griffin O'Neill for $5 million. No amount of money could quiet the grief, and the loss changed the Coppola family forever. As the years moved on, his daughter Sophia stepped forward. In 1990, her role in The Godfather Part 3 sparked a storm of backlash. Winona Ryder had originally been cast, but left due to health issues. Other big names like Madonna and Julia Roberts were considered, but in the end, Coppola chose his 19-year-old daughter, who had no real acting experience. The budget was $20 million, and the production took hits immediately. The Vatican refused filming access because of the story's themes. Once the movie came out, critics attacked Sophia's performance. They called it flat and unskilled. They accused Coppola of nepotism. The weight of the criticism hurt her deeply, and Coppola later admitted the casting was a mistake. Yet, the story didn't end there. Sophia rose out of that painful moment and became an acclaimed director, even winning an Oscar for Lost in Translation in 2003. Meanwhile, Roman Coppola built a world of his own. He worked on visual effects and second-unit direction on films like Bram Stoker's Dracula, which earned a BAFTA nomination. Then he expanded into music videos and commercials. His company, the Directors Bureau, created work for The Strokes, Daft Punk, and Fatboy Slim. His videos made it into MoMA, and his sound editing shaped films like Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. Awards followed, and Roman built a reputation as someone who knew how to make sound feel alive. Eleanor Coppola also left her mark. She filmed the making of Apocalypse Now in the Philippines and captured everything the studio wished she hadn't. Brando showed up overweight and unprepared. Martin Sheen had a heart attack. The shoot ran wildly over budget. Frances had breakdowns that Eleanor recorded because she felt the truth mattered. In 1991, she released Hearts of Darkness, and it won an Emmy. It became the definitive story of how a masterpiece nearly destroyed those who made it. The Coppola legacy even stretched into darker corners of Hollywood. The director, Victor Salva, who had been convicted in 1988 for molesting a 12-year-old boy and filming the abuse, served only 15 months of a 3-year sentence. When he was released, Coppola's production company gave him a $5,000 bonus that kept him afloat while he searched for work. Years later, Salva directed Jeepers Creepers and became successful again. The boy he harmed, Nathan Forrest Winters, protested loudly, saying it sickened him to see Salva thrive. The entire situation raised painful questions about forgiveness and accountability in Hollywood. Coppola also stepped into lighter projects, but even those carried trouble. In 1996, he directed Jack, starring Robin Williams. The budget was $45 million. The film made only $78 million worldwide, and critics hated it, giving it a 17% score. Coppola argued over the script with the studio and with Williams, even walking off set on the 10th day before returning. For Williams, it became one of the rare films that failed to cross 100 million. For Coppola, it was another moment where he felt out of step with the audience. Away from film, Coppola found stability in wine. He bought the Inglenook Winery in 1995 and later revealed he paid more than $100 million to regain the historic brand name in 2011. By 2022, the winery produced more than 100,000 cases a year. Wines like Rubicon sold for hundreds of dollars per bottle. Altogether, his wine empire brought in over $100 million a year, money he used to fuel his creative projects, including the massive Megalopolis. In 2007, he poured $18 million of his own money into Youth Without Youth. It told the story of a man struck by lightning who gains strange supernatural powers and ages backward. The film earned only $2.6 million worldwide. Critics called it confusing and pretentious. Coppola admitted it was his way of breaking free from Hollywood, but it didn't land with audiences. In 2011, he made Twixt, a $7 million ghost story starring Val Kilmer. He screened it at the Toronto Film Festival even though it wasn't finished. Some viewers admired its dreamlike feel. Others called it messy. It barely earned anything and didn't cover its cost. Even so, Coppola seemed more interested in trying things than pleasing crowds. Then came a surprise. Netflix released a live-action Pinocchio in 2022 starring Tom Hanks as Geppetto, and Coppola was one of the producers. The cost reached around $80 million. Viewers found the digital puppet unsettling. Critics gave it a 27% score. Subscribers didn't flock to it. It became another expensive misfire. All of this built toward his biggest gamble of all, Megalopolis, a dream he carried for decades. In 2022, he finally made it real, paying for the entire $120 million production from his own pocket. To do that, he sold off parts of his winery holdings. Filming began in November 2022 and ended in March 2023. At one point, the budget almost escaped him again, threatening to reach $148 million. He said that number would have bankrupted him and his entire family. To contain costs, he let one art director go. The rest of the art team quit in protest. The set felt like a wild mix of theater and experiment, something few directors are brave enough to attempt. When the film premiered at Cannes in May 2024, the reaction shocked everyone. The audience booed for almost 10 minutes, something so rare that it felt unreal. The box office did no better. The movie made only $14.3 million worldwide. It opened in the United States with just $4 million and then fell sharply until its weekends made less than $230,000. In France, it made $1.8 million. In Italy, $1.4 million. In the United Kingdom, $900,000. For a $120 million film, the loss was enormous. Reviews were mixed, with a 46% score on Rotten Tomatoes, and the disappointment filled headlines for months. Then, another storm arrived. In September 2024, an extra named Lauren Pagone filed a lawsuit claim saying Coppola kissed and touched her without consent during a nightclub scene filmed on February 14, 2023. She said there were no guidelines, no warnings, and no intimacy coordinators on set. Videos later surfaced of extras being hugged and sprayed with water. Coppola's team said it was part of method acting. The case became a major scandal. Coppola even countersued Variety for libel over how they reported it. After Megalopolis failed, the financial strain became crushing. In October 2025, he sold 7 luxury watches, including a custom FP Journe FFC prototype that brought in $10.8 million, the highest watch sale in the United States since 2017. He used the money to stabilize himself. He also pledged the Sentinel building in San Francisco as collateral and gave up the lease on a private island in Belize. It was a painful sign of how much he had risked. Yet, through all this, Coppola stayed in motion. By 2026, at the age of 86, he announced a special re-release of The Godfather at the Alamo Drafthouse. He paired it with new material and a live finale of Distant Vision, a project he had been shaping for years. He talked about Glimpses of the Moon, a film inspired by his wife Eleanor, who passed away in April 2024. These new plans showed a man who refused to stop creating even after facing loss, scandal, and financial disaster.